I would like to welcome everybody to another webinar by Autodesk showing you bonzai3d. Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Marcus Bonn. I'm Vice President of Development doing today's seminar. And I will actually go ahead and show you a small project from scratch to completion. Before we go into more details about that, let me clarify maybe a few logistics first. The actual demonstration will last anywhere between 20 and 30 minutes. If you see on your screen that things look a little choppy and rough, this is not because of Bonsai. This is simply because of the broadcast limitations that the webinar imposes. Bonsai will actually look quite smooth on my screen. Once we're done with the actual demonstration, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. To do this, simply type the questions in the questions section of the GoToWebinar control panel. And I will then read out the question loud for everybody to hear and try to give a good answer to it. I may not be able to get to all questions afterwards, and rest assured that we will actually answer those then later in form of an email. So everybody will receive some answer in some form. So having said that, let me maybe show you my screen here and talk a little bit about Bonsai. So as I said, we will be doing a project from scratch, a chaise lounge that looks a little bit like the Corbusier Chaise Lounge. It's not a complete copy, it's simply inspired by that. Will take about 20 to 30 minutes, as I said. Unlike previous webinars, the introduction webinar that you may have seen in the past, I may not get to all tools that Bonsai has. I will probably just use a smaller subsection of the tools, but we will show you a project from start to scratch, from scratch to all the way to the end of a project. For those of you who have never seen bonzai3d, let me just give you maybe just a quick overview what it is. It's a new 3D modeler. Its focus is really on the conceptual and sketching in 3D mode of a 3D modeler, but you can still be accurate at the same time. Projects and designs can be both smooth and orthogonal. Bonsai allows you to render your projects photorealistically, and we'll show some of that too at the end of the demonstration. Let's maybe go ahead and start look at the final project, what we're trying to achieve today. So I'm just going to show you a rendering of the final project. So here is the final, what we're trying to achieve today. So let's get started. And I'm running Bonsai here straight out of the box. No modifications have been done yet. If you were to double click or launch Bonsai, you would see exactly that. At this point, we're looking at a 3D environment, and it's really a default scene that is quite large, configured for a building size project. So I'm going to go ahead and change that first. I'm going into my project settings dialog and switch over to the working units and simply choose a different data scale, something that is smaller. Go to lamp. At this point, you could also change units, maybe customize your colors, how you want to look at that. I'm simply using the defaults here. Okay, so now my world has just become a little bit smaller. The next thing I'd like to do is change the grid configurations a little bit. You can see between the dark lines, we have 10 inches with 5 subdivisions each, so effectively a 2-inch grid. That's a little too coarse for me, so I'm changing this down here. Simply type 12 inches, so it becomes a foot with 12 subdivisions, effectively giving me a 1-inch grid. I'm also concerned to make things nice and precise. I'm using grid snapping. So I'm turning the grid snap mode on down here with this icon. And I also would like to change the coarseness of this snapping a little bit. 1/2 inch is a little bit better for what I had in mind here. And now we're almost ready to go. Let me also maybe change the size of the grid a little bit. I'm going to a projection view here, and we move this over and just resize this reference plane, make it a little bit larger. That looks good. Okay, And now we are ready to go. So I'll start out by just drawing some basic lines for the frame of that chair. So using the line drawing tool on the left side, and I'm choosing the mode that simply draws two-dimensional lines. And we'll use other modes here as the project goes along. Clicking on the screen here and just drawing a few lines. You can see automatically as I'm drawing, I'll get guidelines coming up that help me line up my points precisely. So I'm doing this as I'm going along. Also pan over a little bit, double click to end. Like that. As soon as I'm done, you can see I get my object drawn in orange. That means that I, at this point, can still make modifications to that object. For example, I can click on the endpoints here and move those around still up and down to fine-tune the actual appearance. Maybe something like that. And since we are drawing a chair here, we need to be concerned that things aren't perfectly sharp. So right away, I want to round off these corners. So after drawing here, I'm using now a tool called filleting that allows me to, for example, pick a point and automatically fill that. Again, you can see that the shape that was just generated is drawn in orange, which means that the parameters that you see on the right side here in my tool options palette are linked to that shape. So it tells me currently that this radius is 2 inches large. If I like to make this maybe a little bigger, type 3, hit return or tab through the field, and the radius adjusts itself. So this gives you the opportunity right after you're done generating the shape to make modifications and experiment a little bit. So let's go ahead and add a few more radii and fillets here. I'm clicking on the segment. It automatically rounds both ends of that. You can see both arcs are drawn in orange. And I'll make these a little larger, maybe 8 inches, a little more comfortable to sit on. Add one more fillet in here at this junction. And that's it. Of course, this is a wire that was drawn on a 2D reference plane. Here you can see the three-dimensional effect of that. Let's go back to the right view. Let me also show you that you can extend these lines. Maybe I've forgotten to draw a line here at the end at an arc up here. Turn on the insert option, and you can see as soon as I move my mouse over the endpoint here, it gives you a little plus sign, and the arc here will be inserted. Again, you can see the guidelines, the purple line. If I snap to that purple line with my center of the arc, it makes it nice and tangent. Double click. And here is our wire. Great. So let's go into another tool here. This is the offset tool. Right away here, I would like to create a parallel line for this. I'll be using this line later. And you can see by dragging this, I get a nice parallel line to one side. And I'm not using this right away. I'll temporarily hide this line with the isolate feature. So I'll just continue working on the initial wire and hide the other line. I'll get back to it later. Let's complete the actual 3D appearance of that frame. You can see here the wire in 3D. Now I'll be using the move tool with the copy mode, and simply click on that, follow along the guide, and move it out the width of the chair, let's say 18 inches. Like that. That looks good. Let's also complete this by drawing lines connecting the two wires. Again, the insert mode is on. I get the little plus sign, draw from one end to the next. That connects it at the bottom. Do the same thing at the top. And let's fillet this one more time using the fillet tool. Maybe 3 inches. Click on this bottom segment I just drew and the top one. And that's as easy as it is just to create this nice three-dimensional wire that we'll use as the basis for the frame of this chair. Let me draw one more wire here. Go back to the side view and use another arc drawing tool. So we'll use an arc that goes through 3 click points. 1, 2, 3, and that is part of the frame, the support of the chair. Okay, at this point, I'd also like to add some guidelines, some permanent guidelines that help me later on construct some other pieces. So we have a nice tool on here called Guides. And let me also turn on the key point drawing. Key points are important points from our geometry. In this case, the centers of the arc. So if I can snap to this key point, I can, for example, draw a guideline that goes exactly through the center of this large arc here at the bottom. Likewise, I'll draw a guideline to the center of the small fillet here that goes right through the middle of the small rounded fillet here on the side. And let me go to a top view and draw a guide that goes right to the center of our chair. I'm using snapping here, snapping to the midpoint of this line. So I've just created 3 guidelines. You will see those in 3D. Let's turn the key points back off, don't need to see them. And now we are ready to give these frames some thickness. Of course, at this point they are thin wires. Let me draw a small circle on our reference plane. 1 inch diameter, 1/2 inch radius, 2 of those. And with the sweep tool now, I will give these wires some thickness. So here's the axial sweep tool. The options here on the right side. And click on the cross section, a circle, and one of the wires next. And you can see that it will take that round circle and move it along the wires, effectively extruding it along this curved path. So this gives the basic part of the frame some thickness. Let's repeat the same thing here for the other part. Goes a little faster because it's a simpler shape. Okay, as easy as that. And with our guidelines now, I can make an easy copy using mirroring with the copy mode. So we can click on this part, use the guideline as the axis for the mirror, and we have the chair. Great. Now let's work on the cushion part. We go back to the right side and bring back the parallel line that I had hidden earlier. You can see this is still nice and parallel to our frame. Let me chop this up first. I don't need the cushion to extend all the way around the front, so I use the break tool over here. It's one of the line editing tools that Bonsai has. Just click on the part of the wire that you want to break apart here, and then use the delete tool to remove the chopped off portion. Let's do the same thing here at the top. Let me move this here and use the break tool one more time, maybe right in the middle of the arc, and delete the other piece. Okay, let's go back to our 3D view and now extrude that wire into a surface. Use the extrusion tool, click on that wire, and just move it over to the thickness of the chair, 18 inches. Let me also give it a different color, just distinguish it a little bit from the frame itself. Okay. This is the seating surface, and as I said, it's a surface, so it's technically speaking infinitely thin. We may want to give this a little bit of a thickness. Maybe it's made out of bent plywood or some kind of foam material. So we have a nice tool for that. It's called the thicken tool right here. And just click on this surface and it gives it a constant thickness. Again, you can see it's drawn in orange, which means the parameters are live here on the right side. Maybe you can change the justification so it goes to one side of the surface instead of being centered, or maybe give it a bit more thickness. So it's a nice way just to experiment, play with it. I'm going to keep it at the default 1 inch and at the center. So that's our cushion. And again, since this is a piece of furniture, we need to make sure that it's not sharp at the corner. We'll round it off. And just like the way we added a fillet to a line with the fillet tool, we have a rounding tool that does the same thing on 3D objects. So we can apply a constant radius around all the edges or selected edges of an object. Start with maybe a 1/4 inch radius. Just click that surface or that solid object, and you can see that we just took a piece of sandpaper and smoothed off all the corners, or maybe a router that was run around along the edges. Again, it's live, so you can experiment with the thickness, maybe make it a larger radius till you have a good result. Okay, so that's our cushion. Let's add the neck roll here at the corner. Go to a right view. Back to my drawing mode. Start with a circle here. Circle by diameter, and I'm using now this guideline that I was drawing earlier. I can snap to the intersection of that guide with my arc and move the other point exactly on the guideline. So this makes sure that the circle really stays nice and tangent to the inside of that arc. If I wasn't exactly on there, you could see that the circle would intersect our cushion. We don't want that. So we are using the guide here to make sure that this thing sits nice and tangent. Go back to our 3D. Here's the 2D circle I just drew. And with tools you already have seen, with the extrusion tool, we'll turn this into a 3D object, 18 inches thick, and maybe round it also at the corners. Maybe a little larger the radius, maybe a 1-inch radius. Okay. And that's the top part of the chair. Let's construct the legs and the support at the bottom here. Let me go back to a side view and start drawing a simple two-dimensional rectangle. Right on the side here. Maybe right here. And maybe another circle. I still need to have a frame support. Just draw another 2D circle like this. Okay. And let's now look at this in 3D. These are 2D surfaces that were just drawn. Let me now first move the leg. You can see that it intersects the frame. So I'll just move it aside. 1/2 inch. Now it's ready to be extruded into a 3D solid, maybe 3 inches thick, like that. Okay, so this is of course a square extrusion. Furniture legs are usually tapered, so we'll go ahead and do that next. Number of ways we could do that. I'll just use the move tool here just to show you that you can not only move entire objects, you can also move portions of an object. In this case, just the bottom edge. Simply move that over, maybe 1.5 inches in to taper it on one side. Spin around, zoom in a little bit, and do the same thing with the segment down here. So that gives us a nicely tapered leg. Okay, let's make a copy of that. Again, using the mirror tool with the copy mode. Click on the leg and the guideline. That gives us another copy here. Let me go to a front view and draw a board between those two legs. Again, I'll start with a simple 2D rectangle. Draw this on here. 4 inches tall maybe. Go into 3D. Let me give it some thickness. It's a thin surface. I can use the thicken tool for that, or extrude. Either one would work. That's fine. And now let me move it into the center. Use the move tool. And snap to the center point here. That looks good. Okay. One more piece I need to extrude down here. This little circle will become the frame support. Give it a different color first and extrude that. And I purposely extrude this all the way into the leg piece here, and same thing with the other side. Click on the end face here and extrude it all the way to the middle here using snapping. And I'll show you some Boolean operations now. Now I have all these different pieces, 3 pieces for the legs and 1 frame piece here. So with the Boolean union tool, I can first merge these 3 leg pieces into one single solid object. Think of it as cutting and gluing that together from a woodworking standpoint. And the frame piece at the top here will subtract that to cut a hole into the leg piece below. So take this and subtract this from it. So that made a nice hole. So if you were to send this piece to a router, you could actually use this method to define the shape. Put the frame piece back in. Okay. And as you may have guessed, we'll use the mirror tool one more time to create the mirror copy at the back end. like that. Okay, and we're almost done. Let me also create one more piece connecting the two legs here at the front and at the end. Again, I'll use the isolate features that helps me get rid of the pieces I don't want to look at this point. Use the isolate objects command, and we'll draw one more piece here. Use the drawing tool, and we'll draw a straight line using snapping. And you go exactly to the middle, snap to the endpoint here, and use the thicken tool one more time. And we'll bring back the objects we have just isolated. And that's the final geometry of the chair. So it didn't take all that long, about 15 minutes or so. We also go to a perspective view and clean up the project a little bit. We delete the guidelines and turn the grid and axis display off. Okay, at this point we want to add a little bit of rendering features on here. I won't dwell too much on rendering, but just to quickly show you that Bonzai makes it very easy to enhance the quality of the appearance here. So the first thing I want to do is change the default materials to look a little bit more realistic. And for this we can simply double click on the materials that were used for this, and I can change the parameters here, or simply pick a material from a set of libraries of material that comes with Bonzai. So for example, for the frame, I may want to choose a metal finish. So we simply use the metal library down here and scroll down till we have something that we like, maybe the chrome material. Drag that on here. That now copies the parameters from that material into this current working material. Now you don't see any effects, real good effects of this yet, because we'll be using a higher end rendering mode here in just a minute to give it truly ray traced chrome style reflections. So bear with me for just a second till that takes effect. For the seating surface here, which was the second material, let me choose a furniture material, maybe some kind of leather. Again, a large number of materials to choose from. Here's a good leather material that has a nice leather texture with it, and it will automatically show this over here. And for the leg part, maybe we'll construct this out of wood. Go into our wood category down here, woodworking maybe. There's a number of nice wood patterns. I like maple, so we'll use a maple texture. Okay, so these materials now have been applied to our chair, but they may not be properly aligned and sized on our object. So we have a nice tool here that allows us to interactively change the size and scale and orientation of our texture. So first I'm increasing the leather pattern a little bit to get a nice large leather pattern on here. And down here where the wood grain is on our object, you can see first of all it's not at the proper size and not the proper orientation. So let me first change the mapping style on here, and then also you can see that the wood grain on this part of the object is running in the wrong direction. So I'll use the edit texture tool to first of all interactively change this in size, but more importantly I can rotate the texture. You can see that the wood grain now is running with the direction of the board, which is what you of course would expect from an object that would be made out of wood. We do the same thing maybe for some of the surfaces in here. Simply grab this control, rotate it, and you can hopefully see that interactively I can change the orientation and scale and location of this wood texture. So this is two steps you usually perform before rendering: assigning materials and then editing the location, scale, and size of our textures. Let me also create a quick floor ground plane here. We change this to a white color. Quickly make a new material, make it all white, and I'll just draw a large circle that will serve as the base for this. And the display mode I've used so far, the working mode, really does not deal with lighting at all. It simply assumes a light is positioned at the camera where I'm looking at the object and shining on it. So I always get a properly lit appearance. To actually use the lights that are set up in the project, We open up the lights palette. In here we have an ambient light and a sunlight with some basic parameters. To see the effects of those, I switch to the full working mode, display mode, the shaded full mode up here. That now takes into account the actual light source and also all the surface properties. So you get a quick preview. It's still interactive. I can still spin around and maybe change the view using OpenGL. And maybe you want to edit the light. You can do that. Turn the light on. We can not only work with one window, we can work with multiple windows. And you can see here is the light source drawn as an arrow. You move this over and maybe move that light source around a little bit. You can preview the effect of the change of the direction of the light interactively on the window on the right side. Maybe just move the shadows around, something like that. And turn that multi-pane view back off, back into the 3D mode. And then let me render this with the Render Zone rendering mode. Render Zone is a plugin to Bonzai that allows you to create full photorealistic renderings. And I'm just using the default settings here that will apply anti-aliasing and proper reflections and all the texturing. Now, at this point, we get some better quality, but it's still fairly simplistic. At this point, we need to change our lighting conditions. For example, one way to improve this would be to change the direct light to a more accurate light. And I'm using an environment light. And an environment light uses a texture map. We change this from the default texture to such an HDRI image map that I've prepared here, choosing one of the sample images we have available for this. Think of it as a large poster that wraps around your scene. And of course, this image here, that's a scene from some kind of coastal area. This will come up big here in just a second. Of course, it has bright spots in the sky, less brightness here on the ocean, and darker spots on the land. And these areas of the image will then project their intensity back onto the model, creating very subtle but accurate rendering effects. This will take a little longer to render in just a few seconds, maybe a few minutes. So I'm actually not performing the rendering itself. I'm just going to show you the image itself, which is actually the same image that we saw earlier at the beginning of the demonstration. And it would give you an image that looks something like that. And that would take about 2 minutes or 3 minutes to render. You can see that the shadows are nice and soft, and it actually uses some global illumination rendering techniques. So that's also the end of the demonstration. At this point, I would like to invite you to ask questions using the GoToWebinar control panel, if you would just like to type these. And I will get to answering those in just a second.